pain is not what destroys the human being. What destroys the human being is the inability to give pain a place within consciousness. Carl Jung understood that suffering becomes unbearable not because it exists, but because it is resisted, denied, or misunderstood. The psyche does not break under pain itself, but under fragmentation. When an experience cannot be integrated into the totality of the self, it turns against the individual as negativity, despair, and inner conflict. Jung rejected the idea that a healthy life is one without suffering. He saw this belief as childish and dangerous. Life inevitably brings loss, disappointment, fear, and uncertainty. The question is not how to avoid these experiences, but how to meet them without losing oneself. Immunity to pain does not mean numbness. It means wholeness. Negativity arises when the psyche fights reality instead of engaging with it. When emotions are labeled as unacceptable, they do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, where they gain autonomy. What is unconscious does not obey the ego. It expresses itself through mood, projection, anxiety, and destructive patterns. Jung called this the shadow, not because it is evil, but because it is unseen. The shadow is the sum of everything a person refuses to acknowledge about themselves. Pain often originates in the collision between the conscious self-image and the shadow. The more rigid the self-image, the more violent this collision becomes. Negativity intensifies when the ego insists on being only what it prefers, instead of what it actually is. Jung believed that suffering becomes transformative only when it is consciously endured. To endure does not mean to tolerate passively. It means to remain present, attentive, and honest while pain unfolds. Conscious endurance prevents suffering from becoming meaningless. Meaningless suffering is what destroys the soul. The psyche seeks balance, but balance is not static. It is dynamic, constantly adjusting to internal and external conditions. When the ego resists adjustment, symptoms emerge. These symptoms are not malfunctions. They are messages. Pain is one of the psyche's most direct forms of communication. Negativity often signals that something essential has been ignored. It may be an unlived truth, a suppressed emotion, or a denied desire. Jung warned that modern individuals are particularly skilled at distraction. Constant activity, noise, and stimulation serve as defenses against inner confrontation. But what is avoided does not vanish. It waits. When pain is avoided, it returns as anxiety. When anxiety is avoided, it returns as depression. When depression is avoided, it returns as emptiness. Each layer is an attempt by the psyche to force awareness. The psyche prefers suffering to unconsciousness. Immunity to pain develops when a person stops treating inner discomfort as an enemy. The moment pain is approached with curiosity instead of fear, its character changes. It no longer feels like an invasion, but like information. Information can be processed. Threat cannot. Jung emphasized the importance of differentiation. To say, "I am in pain," is very different from saying, "I am pain." Identification collapses identity. Differentiation preserves it. The self must be larger than any emotion it experiences. When this inner spaciousness exists, pain loses its power to dominate. Negativity thrives in narrow consciousness. When awareness contracts, experience feels absolute. When awareness expands, experience becomes relative. This relativity does not diminish suffering, but it prevents despair. Despair is the belief that the current state is permanent. Jung believed that despair arises when the future disappears from imagination. The unconscious restores the future through symbols, dreams, and intuition. Ignoring these signals cuts the individual off from inner guidance. Negativity increases when guidance is absent. The spiritual dimension in Jung's work was not about belief systems, but about relationship to the deeper layers of the psyche. He observed that people who had a symbolic relationship with life endured suffering more resiliently than those who did not. Symbol gives pain a place within a larger pattern. Without pattern, pain feels arbitrary. With pattern, pain feels purposeful, even if its purpose is not immediately clear. Purpose does not justify suffering, but it makes it bearable. Jung believed that meaning is the strongest antidote to psychological collapse. Meaning cannot be manufactured. It emerges when a person is willing to face reality without distortion. Self-deception corrodes meaning. Pretending to be strong when one is broken only deepens fragmentation. Authentic weakness is more integrative than false strength. Negativity often appears when individuals betray their own truth to maintain an image. This betrayal generates inner resentment. Resentment poisons perception. Life begins to feel hostile, even when it is neutral. Jung believed that many people live in conflict not with the world, but with themselves. Pain that is acknowledged completes its cycle. Pain that is denied becomes chronic. This is why Jung insisted that emotions must be experienced fully, but not acted out blindly. Conscious experience is the middle path between suppression and impulsivity. The ego's task is not to eliminate pain, but to hold it. Holding requires strength, patience, and humility. Humility means accepting limitation. Much suffering arises from refusing to accept that one is vulnerable, finite, and imperfect. Jung saw modern humanity as suffering from inflation, the belief that the ego should be all-powerful. When reality contradicts this belief, pain feels humiliating instead of instructive. Humiliation breeds bitterness. Bitterness hardens the psyche. A hardened psyche is not strong. It is brittle. Brittleness leads to breakdown. True strength is flexible. Flexibility allows pain to pass through without shattering identity. This flexibility is developed through repeated encounters with difficulty that are consciously integrated. Negativity loses intensity when a person no longer fears being overwhelmed by their own emotions. Familiarity replaces fear. The unknown is terrifying. The known, even if painful, is manageable. Jung believed that psychological work is a lifelong process. There is no final immunity, only increasing capacity. Expecting permanent comfort leads to disappointment. Accepting fluctuation leads to stability. Stability does not mean calm at all times. It means continuity of self across emotional states. The self remains present in joy, grief, anger, and doubt. This presence is the true spiritual achievement. Pain does not disappear, but it no longer defines. Negativity does not vanish, but it no longer controls. The individual remains intact even when wounded. This is the spiritual secret Jung pointed toward. Not transcendence through escape, but transcendence through integration. Not light without darkness, but consciousness that includes both. When pain is integrated, it becomes depth. When negativity is understood, it becomes signal. When the shadow is acknowledged, it becomes strength. And when the individual no longer runs from inner experience, life itself becomes less threatening. Not because it is easier, but because the self is stronger. That strength is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply endures. Jung understood that the human being does not suffer primarily because of events, but because of the meaning assigned to those events. Meaning determines psychological impact. Two people can experience the same loss, yet one collapses while the other transforms. The difference lies not in strength of character, but in relationship to inner reality. When pain is interpreted as punishment, it corrodes the psyche. When it is interpreted as initiation, it reorganizes it. Jung saw suffering as a threshold experience. It marks a transition between stages of psychological development. Avoiding it arrests growth. Entering it consciously allows maturation. Negativity often emerges at moments of transition. Old identities no longer function, but new ones have not yet formed. This in-between state feels unstable and threatening. Jung called this liminality. Many individuals mistake this state for failure, when in fact it is a sign of impending transformation. The psyche resists change even when change is necessary. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. Negativity thrives in this resistance. It convinces the individual that remaining the same is preferable to risking the unknown. Jung believed that fear of the unknown is at the core of most psychological suffering. This fear is not irrational. The unknown dissolves certainty. But certainty, while comforting, is also limiting. Psychological growth requires surrendering certainty without losing orientation. Orientation comes from values rather than outcomes. When values are clear, uncertainty becomes tolerable. When values are vague, uncertainty becomes terrifying. Jung emphasized the importance of developing an inner compass rather than relying on external guarantees. Negativity increases when life is lived reactively. Reaction means being governed by circumstance. Response means engaging consciously. The difference is subtle but decisive. Response preserves dignity. Reaction erodes it. Dignity stabilizes the psyche under pressure. Without dignity, pain feels degrading. With dignity, pain feels instructive. Jung believed that maintaining dignity in suffering was one of the highest psychological achievements. Dignity does not mean emotional restraint. It means self-respect. Self-respect allows emotion without self-contempt. Contempt toward one's own pain deepens fragmentation. Many people add cruelty to suffering by judging themselves for feeling what they feel. Jung warned that this moralization of emotion is destructive. Emotions are facts of the psyche. Denying them does not make one virtuous. It makes one divided. Division within the psyche creates inner warfare. Inner warfare consumes enormous energy. Exhaustion follows. Exhaustion often masquerades as depression. Restoring inner cooperation restores vitality. Cooperation does not require agreement between inner parts. It requires recognition. When conflicting impulses are acknowledged, they lose their need to fight for dominance. Jung emphasized that every emotion contains information. Anger reveals violated boundaries. Sadness reveals attachment. Fear reveals perceived threat. Negativity arises when these messages are ignored or dismissed. Ignoring emotional information is like ignoring physical pain. The signal intensifies until it cannot be ignored. Chronic negativity is often the result of long-term emotional neglect. The modern individual is particularly vulnerable to this neglect because productivity is valued over reflection. Jung warned that a life lived only outwardly becomes psychologically impoverished. Inner life withers. Withering produces emptiness. Emptiness is not neutral. It is experienced as meaninglessness. Meaninglessness amplifies suffering. Pain without meaning feels intolerable. Jung believed that meaning emerges when the individual enters into dialogue with the unconscious. This dialogue does not require mystical belief. It requires attention to dreams, fantasies, intuitions, and emotional reactions. Dreams were central to Jung's work because they reveal what consciousness avoids. Avoidance maintains comfort but sacrifices wholeness. Wholeness requires confrontation. Confrontation does not mean aggression. It means facing what is. Facing restores reality. Reality grounds the psyche. Negativity often flourishes in fantasy rather than reality. Catastrophic imagination magnifies pain beyond its actual scope. Grounding returns proportion. Proportion is a psychological safeguard. Jung believed that losing proportion was a precursor to breakdown. Regaining it restores stability. Stability allows patience. Patience allows processes to unfold naturally. Forcing resolution interrupts integration. Integration cannot be rushed. Jung warned against premature insight. Intellectual understanding without emotional digestion creates illusion of progress without transformation. True integration is felt somatically. The body relaxes. Breath deepens. Reactivity decreases. These signs indicate genuine change. Negativity often persists when change is imagined rather than embodied. Embodiment requires time. Time is an essential element of healing. Jung believed that time allows the psyche to reorganize itself. Impatience interferes with this natural rhythm. Impatience arises from fear. Fear demands immediate relief. Relief achieved through avoidance increases long-term suffering. Short-term relief often trades depth for comfort. Jung cautioned against this trade. Depth sustains life during inevitable hardship. A shallow life collapses under pressure. A deep life bends. Bending preserves structure. Breaking destroys it. Psychological immunity is therefore not resistance, but elasticity. Elasticity develops through repeated exposure to manageable stress. Avoidance deprives the psyche of this training. Jung believed that overprotected individuals are often the most fragile. Fragility is not sensitivity. It is lack of integration. Sensitivity combined with integration becomes wisdom. Wisdom perceives limits without despair. It accepts vulnerability without humiliation. Humiliation often comes from comparing oneself to unrealistic ideals. Jung believed that idealization damages the psyche. Realistic self-acceptance heals it. Self-acceptance does not mean complacency. It means starting from truth rather than fantasy. Truth stabilizes. Fantasy destabilizes when contradicted by reality. Negativity often arises when fantasy collapses. Collapse can be devastating or liberating, depending on awareness. Awareness transforms collapse into reorientation. Reorientation restores direction. Direction reduces anxiety. Anxiety fuels negativity. Reducing anxiety weakens negativity at its root. Pain remains, but it no longer multiplies. Multiplication of pain is what Jung sought to prevent. Pain multiplied by fear, resistance, shame, and meaninglessness becomes unbearable. Pain experienced with awareness remains singular. Singular pain is survivable. This is the essence of Jung's insight. Jung understood that the psyche does not mature through comfort, but through encounter. Encounter with limitation, encounter with contradiction, encounter with suffering. Each encounter strips away illusion and brings the individual closer to psychological reality. Reality, while often painful, is stabilizing. Illusion is comforting but fragile. Negativity often intensifies when illusion collapses suddenly. The loss of illusion feels like betrayal by life itself. Jung believed that many people suffer not because life is cruel, but because they expected it to be something it never promised to be. Adjusting expectation is not resignation, it is realism. Realism restores orientation. When a person sees life clearly, pain loses its moral charge. It is no longer proof of failure or injustice. It becomes an element of existence. This shift reduces bitterness. Bitterness is the result of resisted pain. Resisted pain seeks justification. It demands that suffering be explained as unfair. This demand locks the psyche in grievance. Grievance immobilizes. It turns attention backward. Jung believed that psychological health requires forward movement, even when carrying wounds. Movement does not mean forgetting. It means integrating memory into present awareness without being enslaved by it. Memory acknowledged becomes history. Memory denied becomes destiny. Negativity often originates in unresolved memory. The past intrudes because it was never consciously processed. Jung emphasized remembrance with reflection rather than repression. Reflection transforms memory. It contextualizes experience. Context reduces emotional charge. Without context, pain feels endless. With context, pain has duration. Duration implies an end. The belief that pain is endless creates despair. Despair collapses time into an eternal present of suffering. Jung saw despair as a distortion of perception. Restoring temporal perspective restores hope. Hope does not require optimism. It requires continuity. Continuity of self across time protects against psychological disintegration. Even when the future is unclear, continuity preserves identity. Identity rooted in awareness rather than circumstance is resilient. Circumstance-based identity collapses when conditions change. Change is inevitable. Negativity increases when identity depends on what cannot be controlled. Jung emphasized inner anchoring. The self must be anchored internally to remain stable externally. Internal anchoring comes from self-knowledge. Self-knowledge includes knowing one's limits. Limits define shape. Shape gives structure. Structure supports function. A psyche without limits is diffuse. Diffusion leads to overwhelm. Overwhelm intensifies pain. Jung believed that acknowledging limitation is a spiritual act. It aligns the individual with reality. Reality resists grandiosity. Grandiosity inflates the ego. Inflated ego is fragile. Fragility invites collapse. Collapse humbles. Humility restores proportion. Proportion stabilizes emotion. Stabilized emotion allows clear perception. Clear perception reduces misinterpretation. Misinterpretation amplifies negativity. Many people suffer less from events than from the stories they tell themselves about those events. Jung believed that unconscious narratives govern behavior. Bringing these narratives into consciousness reduces their power. Power loses its threat when understood. Understanding does not eliminate pain, but it removes confusion. Confusion intensifies fear. Fear amplifies pain. Reducing fear reduces suffering. Jung believed fear diminishes when the individual trusts the psyche's capacity to endure. Trust develops through experience, not reassurance. Each time pain is survived consciously, trust increases. This trust becomes an inner refuge. Refuge does not eliminate storms, but it prevents destruction. Negativity weakens when refuge exists. Without refuge, every emotion feels life-threatening. With refuge, emotion becomes manageable. Manageable does not mean small. It means contained. Containment is a key Jungian concept. Containment allows intensity without chaos. Chaos overwhelms meaning. Meaning stabilizes chaos. Jung believed that the task of consciousness is to contain the unconscious, not suppress it. Suppression increases pressure. Pressure eventually erupts. Eruption appears as breakdown. Breakdown is often misinterpreted as failure. Jung saw breakdown as a call for reorganization. Reorganization restores coherence. Coherence aligns inner and outer life. Misalignment generates tension. Tension manifests as negativity. Reducing misalignment reduces negativity. Alignment requires honesty. Honesty often hurts, but dishonesty hurts longer. Short-term pain from honesty prevents long-term suffering from denial. Jung believed that courage is the willingness to endure short-term pain for long-term integrity. Integrity stabilizes identity. Stable identity withstands challenge. Challenge is inevitable. Negativity often arises when challenge is personalized. Not every difficulty is an indictment. Understanding this reduces self-blame. Self-blame corrodes self-respect. Self-respect supports resilience. Resilience allows continued engagement with life. Engagement prevents withdrawal. Withdrawal isolates. Isolation magnifies pain. Connection mitigates it. Connection begins within. Inner dialogue replaces inner conflict. Dialogue requires listening. Listening slows reaction. Slower reaction allows choice. Choice restores agency. Agency reduces helplessness. Helplessness intensifies suffering. Jung believed helplessness was one of the most destructive psychological states. Restoring agency does not require control over events, only over response. Response determines experience. Experience shapes memory. Memory shapes identity. Identity influences future response. This cycle can imprison or liberate. Consciousness liberates. Unconsciousness imprisons. Negativity thrives in unconsciousness. Awareness weakens it. Awareness does not judge. Judgment divides. Division fragments. Fragmentation increases pain. Wholeness reduces it. Wholeness includes contradiction. Contradiction is not pathology. Pathology arises when contradiction is denied. Acceptance of contradiction stabilizes the psyche. Stability allows endurance. Endurance deepens character. Character provides orientation. Orientation reduces fear. Fear fuels negativity. Reducing fear reduces suffering. Pain remains part of life, but it no longer dominates. This is not triumph. It is maturity. Maturity accepts cost. Cost gives value. Value gives meaning. Meaning sustains life. Jung believed the goal was not happiness, but meaning. Happiness fades. Meaning endures. Endurance is the quiet victory. And in that endurance, pain loses its tyranny, negativity loses its grip, and the individual stands grounded within the full reality of being human.